Good afternoon. My name is John Marshall, and on behalf of Michael Parenti's family, it's my great honor to welcome you all here today and to welcome the many more of you who are joining us virtually. I first met Michael in 1988. His son Christian and I were both going to college in New York. That fall, a contingent of students rode a bus to Washington, D.C. to join a protest against the U.S. war in El Salvador. Our ambitious goal was to shut down the Pentagon, and over 200 of us, including me and Christian, were arrested trying to do just that. Later that day, after we were released from custody, the protest organizers convened a mass meeting in a church, a Unitarian church in Washington, D.C. Michael was there to meet us. I can't remember if he was one of the official speakers that day, but I do remember that after the speeches were done, he sat in the pews and then later at an Ethiopian restaurant in D.C. and talked with our group for hours. He wanted to hear about the protest, how the police had treated us, how tight were the handcuffs, how long had they detained us. Michael shared stories of his own arrests during the Vietnam protests and how he had been beaten by the police while trying to protect one of his comrades who was being attacked. And I think we just saw a couple of those pictures here. Michael was an engaged intellectual. He brought his training in political science to bear on an increasingly bleak and conservative ideological landscape in the United States. In his many published books and articles, and in his very popular public talks, he elaborated a vision of a society beyond capitalism, where resources would be allocated democratically, not by a so-called market that normalizes growing inequality, imperialism, and environmental destruction. He was adamant that attempts to build that alternative society must be nurtured and defended. Today, a new generation is learning about that alternative vision, often through Michael's talks on YouTube, some of which have over 1 million views. I'm grateful that my daughters, Ida and Rosa, had the chance to meet Uncle Christian's father, and I hope that they will continue to learn about that vision and one day experience it directly. This afternoon, we will hear from Christian, Michael's son, then Max Blumenthal, the founder and editor of The Gray Zone. Next up will be Jimmy Dore, the much-beloved comedian and commentator, who will be followed by Congressman Dennis Kucinich, who you may know from his 2 presidential runs, and as mayor of Cleveland, who successfully fought back against the attempt to privatize Cleveland's public power utility. Last, we'll have Marcy Smith, the mother of Michael's grandson. After the eulogies, you'll be invited to join us outside for refreshments. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming out tonight to honor my father. I'm going to speak about him as a person, less his work and more him as a man. So, my father's story, in many ways, begins with the story of his father, Michael Parenti Sr., or as if you called the house where my step-grandmother, who had been born in Naples and moved to America as an adult and had a very thick Italian accent, if you called there and both Michaels were there, she would answer, and you say, I want to talk to Michael, she'd say, I'm Michael Seen, I'm Michael June. So before we talk about Michael June, we'll talk about Michael Seen here a little bit. So my great-grandfather moved to America from Italy, Giuseppe Parenti, to dig the subway tunnels, and he left his 2 children in Italy for a number of years with their grandmother, and then summoned them to New York in around 1913. My grandfather arrived at age 6. He went to school for a couple years, and he was thrown out of school at age 9 for hitting a teacher who was beating him with a ruler because he couldn't learn English. And so he took the ruler from her and struck her, and thereafter he had to work with his father delivering ice and coal to tenements. And he worked all through his adolescent years carrying these heavy loads up these stairs, and it affected him. He had a permanently stooped back, almost like a hunchback. My grandfather was an angry guy. He was angry about a lot of things, and occasionally he would flip out on my father, and he would beat my father savagely. And my grandfather was also a gambler. He ran numbers for the mob for a little while, got arrested twice for doing that. He had a gas station with a couple other guys that he lost, possibly due to gambling. So home was difficult, and the streets outside where my father grew up were even rougher. My father, this was in East Harlem, my father was a short guy in a tough neighborhood, 118th Street in Lexington. And so guys would start fights with him, and he learned to fight, and he fought a lot, and he fought well. He was very proud of his left hook. He was left-handed. He was in a gang. They fought regularly. He had a knife pulled on him in a card game, stuff like that. His mother was a seamstress, and they were very poor. She worked a lot. She died of a congenital heart ailment that almost killed her when he was born. And he was only 17 when she died, and he never really got over that wound. It's something he carried with him the rest of his life. Those years in East Harlem was represented by Vito Marcantonio, who was considered one of the most left-wing politicians to ever go to Congress. He was, as they say, influenced by Marxism and indeed oriented towards Marxism. He ran one of Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia's campaigns, and then Vito Marcantonio went to Congress, actually as a Republican, but also Fiorello LaGuardia was also a Republican, interestingly. And Marcantonio had what they called documented connections to the Communist Party and other Communist front groups. And my father told me a story of he saw Vito Marcantonio speak several times because he would speak on the corners in East Harlem. And he saw him at about age 11, my father reported to me that he saw Vito Marcantonio speaking to this crowd, and he said, my father said to himself, someday I'm going to do that. And he did. He told me another story about seeing Vito Marcantonio. And there was a big rally of mostly Italian Americans, but with some Puerto Ricans, and Vito Marcantonio was speaking, and then in from West Harlem came a bunch of African American people, and the crowd kind of like bristled, and Vito Marcantonio said, let's welcome our neighbors and our brothers and sisters and fellow workers from West Harlem, and calmed everyone down, refocused their minds on what really mattered, their class interests. So these were some of the early influences on my father. That's why I bring it up. One of Vito Marcantonio's mentors was a guy named Leonard Cavello, who was an Italian from Italy who was a famous educator, and he instilled in these Italian-American kids some pride for their ethnic heritage because they were sort of ashamed of it. And he mentored Vito Marcantonio, and then he worked at a grade school that my father went to, and apparently grabbed my father by the ear once. And then years later, my father and Cavello were on a panel together when my father was in graduate school. And my father said to me, hey, last time we met, you grabbed me by the ear. I was 8 years old. And Cavello said, well, you obviously were doing something bad. So in the early 50s, my grandfather moved up to the North Bronx. He remarried, because his wife had died, my father's mother. My father went to City College. He worked in the mailroom at the UN. He went to France and worked in the UN offices there. He visited Italy. He visited some distant relatives in Italy. I mean, there was a story he told me several times about what real manners were. And he was visiting this family, he had dinner with them, and coffee was being served after dinner. My father was smoking, and he put his cigarette out on the table. And everyone was like, not on the table, on the plate. And people were horrified by this. And the father of the family was like, no, took his own cigarette and put it out, to show that. My father's point was, it's not the rules that matter, it's making people feel welcome. And he realized that he had made a mistake with the cigarette, but felt welcome anyway. So my father went to Brown for his MA. He wrote a dissertation about apartheid. He taught at City College during that, on and off. And when he got his MA, he went back to New York, living with his father in the North Bronx. And my grandfather at that time had a truck delivering bread. And so after my father had his MA, my grandfather said, now you're going to come back and work on the truck? And my dad was like, no, I'm going to go to Yale and get a PhD. But there were a lot of stories like that with my grandfather. There was a time he was helping my father move later in life after he'd gotten his PhD, moving house, and my father realized he'd lost the diploma for his PhD, and my grandfather flipped out. He was like, what? He said, all those years, all that money, all that work, all that education for nothing? And it was like, no, it's just a certificate. I get another one. He was finally calmed down. So my father went off to Yale. He studied with the liberal. He studied with a sort of CIA-adjacent, mainstream liberal political scientist of some renown, Robert Dole. And at this time, my father was really just, as in his own words, a kind of left-leaning Cold War liberal. He was not yet a Marxist. He did not study Marxism at Yale. Right after he got his PhD, or maybe even before he got it, while he was, his first job was teaching at Stony Brook, SUNY Stony Brook on Long Island. And believe it or not, he was not reappointed for, of all things, not publishing enough. I mean, this guy wrote like 30 books. So any young writers out there who, have writer's block, it can happen to the best of us. So eventually, he ends up back at Yale. He meets my mother in New York City, and it sounded like it was a pretty groovy time in the 60s. He was into Reichian therapy for a while, and he got into a lot of this kind of alternative stuff early, macrobiotic cooking, yoga, these sorts of things in the early 60s. And in 68, 69, he had a fellowship at Yale, and I was born there in New Haven. And that's when he got really radicalized. This was like the height of the anti-war movement. And he started organizing and being an activist. And that's also where he got his first police beating. My parents split up, and he went on in 1970 to Champlain-Urbana, where he had a tenure-track job. And there he met, among others, these two other Italian-American professors, a guy named Phil Moranto and another guy named Rocco Lombardi, and they were all very involved in the anti-war movement, very active. And one night, Phil and my father made a pledge to each other that if one of them was being attacked by the police and the other one was there, that whoever was not being attacked by the police would jump in and block the blows of the police. Sounds like late night talk. And then a couple months later, there was a protest, and the police attacked my father, and they were beating him. Those are the photographs of him bloodied that you saw. And they were beating him savagely, and Phil Moranto was there, and Phil Moranto jumped in while 5 or 6 cops were beating my father and covered him and took many of the blows that were meant for my father. Needless to say, all 3 of those guys were blacklisted. They were fired and they were blacklisted. My father went from there to a job at UVM, where he had the support of his whole department and most of the administration, but couldn't get reappointed because of the intervention at the level of the Board of Trustees. They thought he was a red, which he was sort of becoming. And it was around that time in Burlington, Vermont, where he met, among others, a now famous but passed away, Murray Bookchin, famous anarchist theorist, who's became a very important influence on the PKK, the Kurdish movement in Rojava, in northern Syria and Turkey and northern Iraq to some extent, and who didn't have an academic position, held forth in coffee shops, but also a young guy named Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders had run for governor in 1972 in sort of a prank campaign. And in 1974, he ran again for governor, and my father ran for Congress, both on the Liberty Union ticket, which is a small Vermont party, and they would normally get about 1%. And my father got over 7% of the vote running for Congress. And according to him, it was that after that election, Bernie got 2%, that he said to Bernie, who was 8 years younger than me, he said, you should get serious about this. And my father, when he ran, he took it very seriously. He cut his hair, he put on a coat and tie, and he tried to make the case for socialism to the working class of Vermont, not just the counterculture of Vermont, but the squares, the working class squares of Vermont. And according to him, Bernie then gets serious, and after 2 more attempts, becomes mayor of Burlington, and the rest is history. He's now a senator, as you know. From then on, the 70s were very rough. My father had a very hard time finding or keeping a job, but luckily he wrote Democracy for the Few, the first radical government textbook, and this is back when everyone had to buy textbooks, and so this kept us going as a family. He then moved from New England to D.C. in 1979, and there was the possibility of an academic job, but again, it fell through. He was just being solidly blacklisted for his radicalism, and it did not deter him. He became more and more explicitly left. In D.C., he joined the Communist Party as a secret member, and he became more vocal about defending actually existing socialism. He had very important and profound critiques of the Soviet Union and Cuba, and there are lectures that you can watch on that. But he also defended them, not because he thought they were the best possibility, but because they existed, because they were real. The same reason that he defended the New Deal reformist politics of people like Fiorello LaGuardia and Vito Marcantonio. So he spent some lonely years in D.C., and then finally I moved out here in 1989 and was living in San Francisco, and he would come out and visit, and he was giving lectures for KPFA as fundraisers. And eventually, 1991, he moved out here to Berkeley, and it was like coming home. He finally found a community. Moving to Berkeley was like coming home. Here he found an eclectic, tolerant, radical milieu, a left that was far enough away from the conventions of the establishment on the East Coast to appreciate his uncensored radicalism. And it was a tremendous 30 years. It's where he did most of his writing. And he owes a lot of that to all of you, is what I'm saying. What we talked about at home was overlapped with what he wrote and spoke about, but it was also, there were some consistent themes that I don't think really came out as prominently in his writing, that we would just always return to. And foremost among these was the nature of ruling class power and the role of conscious intent in elite rule. And related to this, the role of conspiracy in history, the conscious intervention, the secret conscious intervention of elites to steer history. And all of this is part of what academics call, but never do, which is studying up. Because it's not so easy to study elites, but this was a really central focus for him. Connected to this, of course, was what we would now call the deep state, well, then was called the deep state too, the role of intelligence agencies. And this was important to him because these agencies are central to state power, yet they're so under-theorized and under-described. And because they're not described and documented properly, they don't get theorized. And so this was a constant theme. And it also interested him because he was under surveillance. He got his FBI file in the late 70s, as was the fashion, and it was thick, and it was clear that they had kept tabs on him. And there was evidence that he was under surveillance later in life. We also talked about the failures of socialism. He spoke eloquently about that in 1 or 2 lectures. And he was really brokenhearted by the collapse of the Soviet Union. Again, not because he thought it was perfect or great, but because it was real, and it was, a real oppositional bulwark against American empire. And he saw immediately that this meant gloves off for the empire, that this was going to usher in a period of great violence coming from the U.S., renewed violence. There was so much, there's, other stuff I'll skip for the sake of time. In his later years, he suffered from dementia, whatever that is. That's a bunch of symptoms, really. It wasn't Alzheimer's. His dementia was not, pathetic. It inhibited his abilities to speak, but he never didn't recognize me or Jack or Marcy. And I think that what his ailment was linked to a series of concussions, one of which was from that police beating. And in his final 3 years, he came back east, and we saw him a lot, and that was really nice. And one of the things we talked about throughout my whole life as a child, through my adulthood, which he never talked about publicly, and he even sort of misrepresented once in print, was death and the afterlife and spiritual reality. In God and His Demons, he says that he's not an atheist, that he's an agnostic, and he doesn't believe in the supernatural. But the fact of the matter is, he did sort of believe in the supernatural. He was he was superstitious, and he meditated regularly. He practiced visualization. His spirituality was essentially Italian peasant, Catholic-coded pagan saint worship, filtered through secularization and Americanization, and then refreshed with a little bit of 1970s styles New Age sensibilities. And of course, he would mock and criticize the New Age, but he had a bit of that in him. He believed in guardian angels, and he would meditate and summon his guardian angels for assistance through visualizations during the many hard times that there were. And he encouraged me to do the same. And I'm not sure I'm as good at it as he is, but I took him seriously and take him seriously. And as I said, he was not an atheist, he was an agnostic. It means he was open to the possibilities. And so, part of me likes to think that he's not completely gone, but rather that he's up there in the big lecture hall in the sky before an adoring audience of the universe, and also part of that audience, and also, when needed, somewhere still close by. Thank you.
How's everybody doing? All right. It's an honor, a huge honor to be here. Didn't know Michael Parenti. I knew Christian Parenti. Known him for a long time, since we were at the Nation magazine. What the hell happened to that place? We kind of came back together in the political wilderness, and here we are. And feels like everything's coming full circle. I did not personally know Michael Parenti. He made a massive impact on me and my thinking, and on the thinking of everyone around the gray zone, everyone who follows the gray zone, the way that we see the world. He really paved the way. Michael Parenti, I only have enough time to clear my throat, and I just wrote down some things, so I'll try to get through it. Michael Parenti's 1986 classic, Inventing Reality, was, of course, seminal for those of us who critique corporate media. Kind of introduced the concept of corporate media, and they never forgave him for it. The New York Times Review at the time said the book was, quote, easy to dismiss because Parenti painted in broad Marxist strokes, in contrast to the pointillist precision of the New York Times that sold America on Iraqi WMDs. This was a slashing study of institutions like the New York Times and its ownership, Pinch-Sulzberger. And this book, Parenti noted how mainstream journalists mask their own ideological biases behind a false patina of objectivity, They own and control reality and then weaponize it to, in his words, exert a subtle, persistent influence in defining the scope of respectable political discourse, channeling public attention in directions that are essentially supportive of the existing political economic system. So the New York Times will tell you that it's simply reporting all the news that's fit to print, but when it labels any counter-hegemonic or socialist leader or political system as authoritarian, any prominent public figure who questions the official version of events from the JFK assassination to the Gulf of Tonkin incident to the Syrian chemical attacks to China's treatment of the Uyghurs, when it labels them as conspiracy theorists, when it refers to Hamas and Hezbollah as Islamic extremist or even terrorist organizations, and then refers to the Likud party of Israel as conservative, as though Netanyahu is motivated primarily by anxiety over gay marriage and not the demographic growth of the indigenous Palestinian population. When it does this, it is in fact advancing a value system. And as Michael Parenti explained, this is the value system of the capitalist class. And you're not allowed to say that. You're not going to find that naughty little 5-letter word on the pages of the New York Times or the Washington Post, which is owned by the third biggest billionaire in the world. Class. You're not allowed to talk about that. But it says it all. And so after Michael Parenti died on January 24th, the task of composing his obituary for the New York Times fell to someone with a bio expressing a morbid but ultimately humble and seemingly apolitical commitment. I write about dead people was the bio that Trip Gabriel provided for himself. But even with the headline of his obituary of Parenti, Gabriel perfectly embodied Parenti's harshest critique of the New York Times and the smug personalities that populated its editorial bureaus. Michael Parenti, unapologetic Marxist theorist and author, dies at 92, read the headline. He viewed U.S. history through the lens of class struggle, but some accused him of defending brutal regimes in the Soviet Union and Serbia. Some accused him. No, you accuse him. You're accusing him of that, but then you're using the some say tactic we always see in corporate media to mask your own ideological biases to demonize the dissident. So it was the very tactics that Michael Parenti wrote about and exposed in Inventing Reality were weaponized against him. It was the tactics that have also been used to justify the destruction of Yugoslavia, or to justify the destruction of post-Soviet Russia, in which 3 to 5 million Russians died from excess deaths as the Harvard boys moved in and economically raped Russia's economy. Did a brutal regime do that? Was a brutal regime responsible for that crime against Russia? Did a brutal regime shell the Russian parliament in 1993 so Yeltsin could rule by decree to take out the hardliners who were actually elected parliamentarians? No, a brutal regime didn't do that. A Democrat named Boris Yeltsin did that. He was a Democrat. I remember the New Yorker correspondent at the time said, you can't make an omelet unless you break some eggs. He had to do that. A Democrat like Vladimir Zelensky right now, who rules Ukraine outside of his presidential term, banning all opposition parties, banning all independent media, jailing opposition lawmakers. He's a Democrat. Only the counter-hegemonic governments are brutal regimes. So this is a really tough obituary for Michael Parenti by a guy who just simply writes about dead people. And as the Twitter historian Esha Krishnaswamy pointed out, the New York Times published a more favorable op-ed of Heinrich Himmler's daughter than it did of Michael Parenti. Gudrun Burowitz, ever-loyal daughter of Himmler, is dead at 88, read the headline. According to Trip Gabriel of the New York Times, Michael Parenti's most unforgivable transgression was to have defended the socialist targets of the post-Cold War U.S. regime change campaigns, which continue to this day. He wrote, his support for nominally Marxist governments led him toward positions few others on the American left would take. Ooh. In the 1980s, he defended the Soviet Union as it crumbled and its former satellites in Eastern Europe won independence. He took the side of Serbia and its murderous leader, Slobodan Milosevic, during the wars in Yugoslavia in the 1990s, as that country fractured into independent nations. It just fractured. It just happened to just break apart. Didn't feel like being together anymore. And NATO carried out a bombing campaign against Serbia. The two have nothing to do with one another. So, because dead people cannot demand corrections or write letters to the editor, I flew 3,000 miles to come here today to set the record straight that was the most important and most courageous thing that Michael Parenti did, was to defend those nations and their people against this brutal regime. While the compatible left intellectuals celebrated the collapse of the socialist bloc and cheered on the grotesque regime change wars that inevitably followed and ignored the human toll and the migration flows, Parenti remained consistent. He stuck to his guns, and he sharpened his critique of empire over time. His book, To Kill a Nation, is, as I said, probably his bravest work, as he methodically interrogated the planned destruction of Yugoslavia as the last socialist state in Europe, and the criminal NATO war that followed against the Serbian rump state, using the many deceptions that justified the whole assault to indict Western media. To Kill a Nation is a model for the kind of work that we do at the Gray Zone, published at a time before the internet, before the mass proliferation of independent media. And it provides a basis for us to understand the inexorable march of Western campaigns to subsequently destroy Iraq, destroy Libya, Syria, and now target Iran and Russia via Ukraine, which Yugoslavia made possible. Before the Western media disseminated U.S.-concocted claims of Gaddafi supplying his men with Viagra to commit mass rape in Benghazi, or Assad gassing retreating rebels in Douma, Syria in April 2018, both proven hoaxes which justified NATO bombing campaigns against those countries, there were countless atrocity deceptions across the former Yugoslavia, such as the massacre of 43 supposedly innocent men in January 1999 in the Kosovar village of Rasak, which a U.S. official explicitly blamed on Yugoslav police. This became the Clinton administration's pretext for demanding total NATO occupation and authorizing a massive bombing campaign on the Serbs, despite the fact that, as Parenti outlined and exposed in To Kill a Nation, those killed in Rasak were actually fighters from the CIA-backed conglomeration of bandits, drug traffickers, mafiosi, and jihadists known as the KLA, or Kosovar Liberation Army, and had been killed after attacking Yugoslav police. Another deception. Milosevic is portrayed as murderous by the New York Times for incidents both real, imaginary, and exaggerated. But what about the KLA and the Bosnian and Croatian forces who conducted hideous atrocities against Serbs with Western support, including in and around Srebrenica? What about the U.S.-controlled NATO forces that bombed radio television Serbia, destroyed bridges, decimated power plants, massacred refugee convoys, and which deployed depleted uranium, cluster bombs, and napalm against a largely defenseless civilian population? Are they not murderous too? Today, Donald Trump is portrayed by the Democrats and much of our media as a demented madman for not only bombing bridges and power stations in Iran, but also his threat to destroy an entire civilization, his threat to bomb Iran back to the Stone Age. So too is his Secretary of War and DUI hire, Pete Hegseth, who's vowed death and destruction raining down from the skies all day long on the people of Iran. And they are sadistic, sociopathic figures, to be sure. In an age of cartoon villains, there's some of them, they stand out. But who said this? You know, no real prizes for who can guess, but I bet you some of you can. I was suggesting that we blow up all the bridges on the Drina. I was suggesting that we take out his oil supplies. That was Joe Biden on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee referring to NATO assaults on Serbia, who said this: the aim of the war on Yugoslavia is to demolish, destroy, devastate, degrade, and ultimately eliminate the essential infrastructure of the country. That was Wesley Clark, the NATO commander, as quoted by Michael Parenti. So Donald Trump, if we understand what Michael Parenti was getting at and read his work, we understand that Donald Trump is not just some maniacal, irrational aberration against an otherwise sober-minded leadership which favors negotiation to civilian slaughter and mass destruction. He is the most honest face of the capitalist and, I would add, militant Zionist class that he serves. And he and those around him know exactly what they're doing. They are the embodiment of what Parenti called rational fascism. And they also know that they enjoy total impunity when they do it. That's why none of the U.S. military or political officials who ordered the killing of thousands of civilians and billions of dollars in property damage in Yugoslavia ever faced any legal accountability for their crimes. As Parenti pointed out, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia was set up by Madeleine Albright with U.S. funding in total violation of the UN Charter, with no precedent in international law and no mandate from the World Court. It was essentially a U.S. court in The Hague. And it was a product of the same so-called U.S.-led rules-based order which has protected the perpetrators of the Gaza genocide. It's a system in which the U.S. makes the rules and everyone must follow their orders. And so a courtroom drama was contrived as a political extension of NATO's war, and it took on the form of the prosecution of Slobodan Milosevic. But here's something else that Trip Gabriel of the New York Times won't tell you. In 2016, 10 years after being subjected to an international trial and being denied heart surgery leading to his death in a high-security prison inside The Hague, which prevented him from publicly confronting the NATO powers that had bombarded and destroyed his country, Slobodan Milosevic was exonerated by the International Tribunal, which found that he was not responsible for war crimes committed during the 1992 to 1995 Bosnian War. They won't tell you that. Michael Parenti got it right. You won't know that from his corporate media obituary, that Michael Parenti got it right again. Michael Parenti was right. Michael Parenti was right because he was consistent, because he stuck to his guns, because he painted in straight lines. He never veered from an anti-imperialist analysis when so many other left intellectuals did. He was right because he did not seek elite respectability. And so you would never find him on some shadowy financier's jet. He would be right down here with the people in Berkeley. He spoke for the working class from which he came. He was right. He was righteous. Michael Parenti is a guiding light in the darkness of this blood-stained golden age. Michael Parenti, presente.
Well, that was a great speech. Unfortunately, I was going to say most of that. And I'm here because Michael Parenti didn't just teach me, he armed me. As a comedian, I've spent years trying to tell truth about power with a microphone and a couple of jokes. I've always looked to Michael as the master. He showed us that humor isn't fluff. It's the Trojan horse that gets the hard truth past the gatekeepers. He didn't lecture down to people. He made the absurdity of capitalism so obvious that you had to laugh. And once you laughed, you couldn't unsee it. Think about his famous line on freedom. You will have no sensation of a leash around your neck if you sit by the peg all day. It's only when you stray that you feel the restraining tug. And he delivered that with a little grin, like he was letting you in on the world's best-kept secret. No shouting, no jargon, just a perfect everyday image that suddenly made corporate media, think tank propaganda, and the whole you're free to say whatever you want as long as it doesn't matter game crystal clear. That's Michael. He weaponized the chuckle. He turned the invisible chains into something you could point at and mock. Hang on a second. If you ever sat in one of his lectures or if you watched him online, as I've done for hours, you know what truly set him apart was his razor-sharp wit and his disarming humor. He understood something that most intellectuals forget. The revolution needs jokes. Dry theory puts people to sleep, laughter wakes them up, then arms them. His lectures weren't dusty seminars, they were performances. He'd wave those expressive Italian hands like a conductor, build to a punchline, and slide the knife in while the audience was still chuckling. As one admirer put it, he had the timing of a stand-up comedian and the rigor of a scholar. Just picture him on stage, microphone in hand, though the microphone often had other ideas. Parenti's legendary battles with faulty sound systems became comedy routines in themselves. He'd wrestle the thing, mutter about how even basic technology fails the people while the rich get seamless service. And then he'd turn technical difficulties into devastating commentary on capitalism's priorities. We go to libraries cutting back hours, but goddamn sound systems that don't even work, and then the crowd would roar, and suddenly the absurdity of the system was crystal clear. And his humor wasn't decoration. It was the delivery system for hard truths. He'd skewer the rags to riches myth with a grin, the idea that anyone can make it if they just work hard, while ignoring that the real trick is getting others to work hard for you. Or he'd mock imperial propaganda, imitating the breathless media tone that turned every U.S. adversary into the new Hitler. With perfect deadpan, he'd note how convenient it was that these madmen always seemed to threaten corporate profits more than human rights. Laughter followed, then the sobering realization we've been sold the same script for decades. I tried to compile some of my favorite jokes of his. So when he said about Democrats and liberals, Democrats are lily-livered, weasel-assed collaborators. And when I heard that, I knew this was the guy. Right? On getting rich, he said the trick to getting rich is not to work hard, but getting others to work hard for you. And profits are what you make when not working. On Margaret Thatcher, he said, Margaret Thatcher, who we all know is Ronald Reagan in drag. And someone once said that Margaret Thatcher satisfied the average Englishman's longing for the perfect dominatrix. The Iron Lady should best be remembered as the Leather Lady. On Russia, post-1991, he retold the joke, what did capitalism accomplish in 1 year that communism could not do in 70 years? Make communism look good. He also was very self-deprecating. He said, "I used to hate ticks until I started sucking blood." He also said on foreign policy, "I'm not one of those critics that believes U.S. foreign policy is confused or stupid or misinformed or well-intentioned, but it goes awry. I think it's a brilliant policy filled with many brilliant, terrible, horrible victories." If you hear it in his delivery, it's a lot funnier than I'm being right now. So, he authored over 20 books, but it was in person where his gifts really shined the brightest. Hundreds of lectures in union halls, campuses, churches, anywhere they'd have him. He didn't preach to the converted, he converted through engagement, using humor to lower defenses and let the analysis hit home. As his son Christian so beautifully said, he's gone to the great lecture hall in the sky, and one can only imagine the standing ovation and the perfectly timed zinger he delivered upon arrival. In an age of sanitized discourse and corporate media spin, Michael reminded us that truth-telling can be joyful. His wit wasn't mean-spirited. It was warm, wicked, and deeply human. It came from love. Love for the working class, love for the oppressed, love for the possibilities of a better world. He hated injustice, but he loved people enough to make the fight against it entertaining. Michael Parenti showed us that seriousness and laughter are not opposites. They are allies in the struggle. He leaves us his books, his recordings, his ideas, but most precious is the lesson he embodied. Speak truth boldly, and don't forget to make them laugh along the way, because when the powerful lose their dignity and laughter, they lose some of their power too. Rest well, Michael. The mic is finally working perfectly in that great hall, and somewhere a room full of comrades is laughing, learning, and getting ready to carry on.
On behalf of the Kucinich family and my wife Elizabeth, we want to extend to Christian and the Parenti family, to his friends, and to all of you here in attendance and to those who are watching, our sincere condolences, and at the same time, how important it is that we're here to celebrate Michael's life. Michael Parenti did not write or speak to soothe the world. He did it to wake it up. At a time when comfort so often drifted into complacency, he chose the harder path, disturbing the settled, unsettling the certain, and calling us back to a sharper, more demanding moral awareness. He understood that injustice does not endure by force alone, but by the quiet erosion of conscience, by the slow acceptance of what should never be accepted. Injustice endures by silence, which is complicity. Michael understood that. If you tremble with indignation at every injustice, then you are a comrade of mine, wrote Che Guevara. Michael Parenti carried that spirit through a lifetime of work. He asked not for detached agreement, but for feeling, for a refusal to look away. Beneath the rigor of his intellectual analysis, there was always this insistence that human suffering is never an abstraction, and that to recognize human suffering is to be changed by it. As Michael warned in Against Empire, to make the world safe for democracy, we must first to make democracy safe for the world. a reminder that justice cannot remain a slogan while suffering, or worse, atrocity, persists in its name. Yet the clarity Michael demanded of others was the clarity he first demanded of himself. Like George Orwell, he understood that the struggle for justice begins with the struggle for truth. The very concept of objective truth is fading out of the world. Lies will pass into history. Against this, Parenti devoted his life to naming power plainly, to exposing illusion, to challenging the narratives that render inequality natural and injustice invisible. In Inventing Reality, he cautioned that, quote, the media do not merely report the news, they help create it, insisting that what passes for public understanding is often carefully shaped by those who collude with interest groups who benefit from confusion. Nowhere was his voice more unflinching than in his critique of empire. He refused the softened language of policy and instead insisted on calling things by their name. Empires do not just happen, he wrote in Against Empire. They are built, maintained, and justified. Beyond those justifications, he reminded us, our human costs too easily ignored. Quote, the sword of empire cuts through the lives of ordinary people. For Michael, empire was not an abstraction, it was a lived reality, measured in displacement, violence, and silenced histories. This moral purpose shaped not only what he wrote and spoke, but how he lived as a scholar, his academic path, City College of New York, Brown, Yale, might have led him to the quiet authority of institutional life. Michael Parenti never mistook prestige for purpose. He did not retreat behind the walls of the academy. He stepped beyond them and often shook them. He carried his learning not as a credential, but as a responsibility. He became something rarer than a conventional academic. He was a scientist who wrote for all who sought to understand power, not just those who were trained to study it. He was a teacher whose moral clarity over obscurity, who chose moral clarity over obscurity, illumination over display, trusting that ordinary people were capable of grasping even the most complex truths when those truths were spoken plainly. Democracy, he said, is not just a right to vote. He wrote that also in Democracy for the Few. It is the right to live in dignity. And elsewhere in that same work, with characteristic sharpness, he reminded us that in a plutocracy, the wealthy are the ones who rule, always challenging the assumption that formal institutions alone will guarantee us freedom. In this, he lived as a public intellectual in the deepest democratic sense. He believed that education was not a private possession, but a shared trust, that knowledge must circulate among the many, if it is to matter at all. His work was not simply to interpret the world for those who are often denied the tools to understand it. His was the intention to change the world. He warned in Democracy for the Few that democracy itself is fragile when power concentrates. When wealth is concentrated, so is political power. And that's a simple truth that ran like a thread through his life's work. And yet, for all of his fierce critique, there was nothing distant or detached in him. His work was grounded in deeper human concern, one that Albert Camus expressed with quiet gravity when he said, "The purpose of a writer is to keep civilization from destroying itself." Michael Parenti wrote in that spirit, not out of despair, but out of a stubborn faith that people could still be reawakened, that moral life could still be reclaimed, that indifference need not have the final word. He believed, as he wrote in The Sword and the Dollar, that the dirty truth is that wealth is appropriated, not created. A stark reminder that behind systems and structures lie human choices and human consequences. To encounter Michael Parenti was to encounter a mind without fear and a conscience without compromise. He did not leave his readers or his listeners where they were. He asked something of them: their attention, their honesty, their courage. And in return, he offered something enduring, a clearer vision of the world, and a deeper sense of responsibility within it. He disturbed the comforted, not to wound, but to awaken the possibilities of a just future. And in that awakening, he reminded us, gently, insistently sometimes, of what it means to be fully human, to be unbound by fear or loss, to seek and to believe that you can seek and find a new world. Michael could feel human suffering. He could feel the human suffering from poverty, from dispossession. He could hear the human cries for social and economic justice. He was a conscience that always answered in the affirmative this question from Les Miserables: can you hear the people singing a song of angry men? It is the music of the people who will not be slaves again. When the beating of your heart echoes the beating of the drums, there is a life about to start when tomorrow comes. Thank you, Michael, for giving us a start.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Marcy Smith. I was Michael's daughter-in-law and mother of his grandson, Jack. My relationship with Michael was a little bit different. So I met Michael, in a manner of speaking, when I was in college through his work. When I met him, in that sense, I was 17 years old, and I was sporting a Bush Cheney bumper sticker on the back of my Camry. I had planned on fashioning myself in the model of Madeleine Albright. I was going to go to one of those schools that helps you do that, and life ended up intervening, and I ended up at a different school where I found a political science advisor who coincidentally assigned a lot of Michael Parenti. And I found in Michael's work something that was much more difficult to reckon with. It wasn't liberal sentimentality. It wasn't simple-minded. It was something rigorous and something I had not encountered before. something much harder to dismiss. So Michael played a very important role in my intellectual development. I'll talk about that more in a moment. But it's hard to believe, I think if anybody had told me, of course, at 17 that I would, go on to end up being so close to him, joining his family, it would have been very hard for anyone to have believed that. So there are many things that I really loved and admired about Michael, and others have spoken to them much more eloquently than I will. But some of those things were his pathos. He was so raw and so alive. He was so, as I said, unsentimental, willing to confront suffering, willing to say what it was he thought, even when the costs were very high. He was willing to change his mind as well, and to do it publicly, and to not, self-flagellate for having committed the crime of critical thinking and iterating, which all of us hopefully are willing to do. Relatedly, he was, I think, the first place where I saw contradiction being engaged, actively. He, on the one hand, defended the Soviet Union, and on the other hand was among the most stalwart defenders of civil liberties I've ever known. He took the Bill of Rights very seriously. He took the best parts of the American project very seriously, and he was also, obviously, as we all know, completely unwilling to pat ridiculous assertions about America's quote-unquote enemies. He, by extension, had a lot of integrity. Like I said, he was going to tell you what he thought. So you might not agree with him, but you knew that he meant what he was saying. And he took that quest for truth very seriously. Again, to the point of, in moments in his life, a kind of martyrdom. He was also tough, and I love this. He was tough in his thinking, that was evident. But like Christian spoke about, he was tough as a consequence of the world from which he came. One of my favorite stories about him is from, I think it was less than a year ago, about a year ago. He was living in this really lovely retirement home in Amherst, Massachusetts, not far from where Christian and Jack and I live. And we came in one day, and there was this very tall Korean War veteran. You knew this because he was always wearing his hat. And he had a shiner, a big shiner. And this fellow must have been, 6'1", 6'2", 6'3", very tall. And we asked one of the nurses, what happened to him? And they were like, "Oh, you haven't heard?" Like, no. Well, Michael sent him to the hospital. What? He had been bullying Michael, basically. He'd been teasing him, and he just wouldn't let up. And it was wonderful because all of the nurses were very firmly on Michael's side. He had it coming. He had it coming. Had to do what he had to do. So he still had that left hook, for sure. I loved how brave Michael was. He was, as typified by that story, just brave until the end. And of course, I loved how smart he was. It was just a pleasure to be around somebody whose mind moved that quick, even though I did not get many years with him before dementia started thwarting him in ways that were very frustrating. It was very, very frustrating for him. It was a real suffering for him that he bore valiantly and very elegantly. But in addition to being tough, he was also very tender. I remember he and I both loved musicals. Christian was appalled that we loved musicals as much as we did and do. We both in particular loved the song One Enchanted Evening. And there was one night that I remember Christian and I calling him, having him on speakerphone, and Michael and I singing together One Enchanted Evening. He was so tender with Jack. You all got to see some of those photos. I think it's so sweet, too, because he, as I understand it, had, given the state of the world, advised Christian, you ought to be circumspect about bringing children into this mess. But I'm obviously very glad Christian did not take his advice. And I think Michael is very glad as well that Christian did not take his advice. Jack brought and continues to bring all of us so much joy. Similarly, on the note about tenderness, one of the most meaningful conversations Michael and I had, he wanted me to know I never struck Christian. And I just find that so beautiful, so touching. Michael really wanted me to know that that was a demon he had slayed. He had to correct himself. He was like, well, one time on the beach when he was probably like an early teenager, but he really had it coming. And I checked with Christian, he really had it coming. So, because Michael had a lot of passion. So that, and I know Christian, so I'm sure it did take some restraint. I loved also that Michael was willing to always engage new information up until the very end of his life. So I feel like really the heart of my relationship with Michael was forged in the final days of his life, the final 10 days, wherein I sort of stumbled into accidentally holding kind of a traditional vigil for him. This was not really on purpose, but the doctors initially shared with us, like, oh, he's gonna pass probably today. But he didn't, and the days kept going, and so it ended up being about 10 days. He was very comfortable, and we played, you actually got to listen to some of the songs we played, Marian hymns, as you all were coming in, but we played those for 10 days straight. I prayed the rosary again and again. And after he'd passed, one of the hospice nurses shared that she'd been doing this a long time, and Michael's was only the third truly peaceful, unmedicated passing that she'd ever witnessed. And that's quite an achievement, because in my own experience, Michael was many wonderful things. I wouldn't have described him as peaceful. I didn't know if that was going to elicit a chuckle, but that's not a judgment at all, because to stare in the face of suffering in the way that Michael did, unflinchingly, how do you hold on to peace? I don't know. I can't do it. But Michael managed to arrive at a place of deep, deep peace. Given that, contrary to some of the noises that Michael made in God and His Demons, which it's like one thing to be a communist, but to be a communist who believes in guardian angels, is just a bridge too far, probably for most people. So I understand why he had to distance himself. But given that was who he was, that is who he is, there was a little piece of evidence suggestive of this peace that I'll share. It was just so beautiful. So we had the lights turned off, so we just had the light from the window, and then candles going, blessed candles going, and they burned for 10 days. And in the first 2 days, I've never seen anything like this. The candles were just exploding. They were so messy, and I would have to take a knife and carve the wax off of the base of the candle whenever I lit a new candle. And then something changed. I don't know what the moment was, but there was a moment when I lit a candle, and I've never seen candles burn as messily as they were in the beginning, and then I'd never seen anything quite like this. The candles started burning from the top to the bottom with zero wax dripping until you would have to look over into the little holder that held the candle to see the wick still burning in the pool of a millimeter of wax. And they did this again and again and again for 7 days. So I researched it actually, and this is something across many spiritual traditions. Candles are a sort of measure of the peace, of the energy or the vibration, whatever. But it seemed very clear to me that, this is a very peaceful environment. Interestingly, about an hour after Michael actually passed, the candles started dripping again, but in the normal fashion. So how did he achieve this peace? What happened? Because as the hospice nurse indicated, this is something rare to, and I share this story also just because I find it very hopeful. I would love to be the fourth, person this hospice nurse ever observed to have a peaceful, unmedicated passing. But what I saw over the course of those 10 days brought to mind that verse about how unless we change and become like little children, we will not enter the kingdom of heaven. And I saw Michael return to a childlike state, not in the sense of, it's diminishing to children to associate that with, simple-mindedness or stupidity, because children aren't. But rather, children are trusting. They're very trusting. They're very forgiving of themselves and of others. They're very present. They're very hopeful. And they're open to mystery. They're not scared or defensive of the fact that they don't know everything. And maybe beyond this, there's an adventure that we can't even really imagine. And there was a transformation that clearly happened in Michael over the course of those 10 days, wherein he found peace with the pain of this life and found a kind of hope as to what was going to come beyond. And I think of everything Michael has shared with me over the course of my life, the opportunity to sit with him those final 10 days and witness that, to be with Christian and Jack and experience that together as a family was definitely the biggest gift of all. So thank you all for being here again, and we hope you enjoy the reception, and I'll pass it back over to John. Thank you.
So thank you to everyone who shared those wonderful, beautiful remarks. And thank you also to Mary Altman on cello. Dale Sang on piano. And Sarah Smith, who sang. So, as Marcy said, there's plenty of food and refreshments in the atrium, so please help yourselves and eat up. There will also be clips from some of Michael's lectures in the fireside room just adjacent to the atrium. There's a guest book in the atrium, so please feel encouraged to sign it and share a memory. And last but not least, we have promised to turn this space back over to the church at 6:30, so please help us comply with that. Thank you very much.
In fact, we wouldn't be here right now with what little resources and whatever ground we've gained if it weren't for the struggles of these people, most of whose names we don't even know or remember today. But they are the brothers and sisters of our history. What I'm suggesting is that democracy is not a fixed and finished system to be preserved. That's what we're always told. We must preserve our democracy, which usually means don't use it, don't get to preserve our rights. You know how you preserve your right to free speech? You keep quiet. Otherwise, they're going to start attacking us and causing trouble. As if it was some Grecian urn that was handed down to us from Athens, or handed down to us by that gaggle of rich merchants, bankers, and slaveholders known as our founding fathers. Democracy is an ongoing process of self-realization carried out by the people in their quest for a better life, a more just life, a more humane, economic, social, political, and cultural life. And there are two dimensions to democracy. One is the one we always learn about. That's formal democracy, electoral democracy, procedural democracy, the democracy of the Bill of Rights, the democracy which says that you have a democracy when you have competitive elections. And there's no questioning this system's ability to produce competitive elections. We have elections for president, for senate, for house, for state assembly, for state senate, for county level, for mayors, for dog catchers, for supervisors, for all sorts of things, for judgeships. We have elections coming out of the kazoo. And but there's another dimension to democracy, many of us have argued. And that's a substantive democracy, not just a procedural one. A class democracy, an economic democracy. That is, democracy is not just about how leaders are selected. It must be measured also by how fair and just it is in its substantive outputs. Not just in the process of its inputs, but what does it actually do for the mass of people in its country? In the treatment of its own common people and in the treatment of the common people of other nations also. I want to make that point clear. I remember being in a teaching at Yale, all these Yale faculty during the Vietnam War, talking about whether or not the anti-war movement was really proper because it was violating certain laws, and whether the law wasn't really something that had to be respected, and could one take the law in their own hands. And I made the very humble point that the Vietnamese didn't have an opportunity to engage in this decision-making system, but they were receiving these bombs and being slaughtered. That there was something wrong with that whole cogitation about the law and the majority and the minority and proper procedure and all that sort of thing, and that you had left out, in your worship of proper procedure, you had left out a very improper thing that was happening over there in Vietnam. But that expropriation of the third world has been going on for 400 years, brings us to another revelation, namely that the third world is not poor. You don't go to poor countries to make money. There are very few poor countries in this world. Most countries are rich. The Philippines are rich. Brazil is rich. Mexico is rich. Chile is rich. Only the people are poor. But there's billions to be made there, to be carved out and to be taken. There's been billions for 400 years. The capitalist European and North American powers have carved out and taken the timber, the flax, the hemp, the cocoa, the rum, the tin, the copper, the iron, the rubber, the bauxite, the slaves, and the cheap labor. They have taken out of these countries. These countries are not underdeveloped, they're overexploited. While we talk about soft on communism, we really should note that the U.S. is very, very, very soft on fascism. That it uses fascism to protect capitalism, all the while claiming that it's saving democracy from communism. In fact, we had something close to pure capitalism. I remember debating a businessman on this, and he kept talking about the free market, this, that, we didn't govern that. I said, you're describing something, and if only we could. I said, why must you talk about it as a hypothetical future, that it's never been given a chance? I said, we did that already. It's called 1890. In 1890, you had a very close approximation to a free market. And what did we have? We had contaminated foods and typhoid epidemics, cholera epidemics. The drinking water in Philadelphia was so contaminated, they had massive typhoid epidemics. We had 11-year-old kids working 14 hours a day in factories. Free market. while grown men were unemployed, young underage girls exploited in factories, used in every way, misused in every way in the free market. No government regulations, no bothersome feminists to come along and fill our heads with silly imaginary problems. We had an environment that was systematically pillaged and raped. We had unrestrained monopolies and trusts. We had mass poverty, unemployment. We had no pension programs, unsafe working conditions, a rate of accident and injury that was even higher than it is today. And we had very, very high profits. So you're right, capitalism was working at its best, and that is when capitalism works at its best. Not for the people, but for the capitalists. You see, the whole essence of that system is that it has a performance and a goal that is for the people who own the system, not for the people who inhabit the country. And in that sense, it was a better system. And when that guy sits there and says, it was better, it'd be better if we had this, better if we had, he's talking from his class perspective. He honestly believes that would be better. And it would be so much better for him, he can't but help believe that it would be better for everyone else. And this brings us to Parenti's second law of politics. Don't ask me what the first law, I think it just sounds better, the second law of politics. When change threatens to rule, then the rules are changed. What's often left, even when there is debate about interventionist policy, what's left unexamined is whether or not that policy really is coming from good intentions. The regular demonizing of foreign leaders. I mean, in Vietnam, you know, the debate finally came as we should get. The debate was between those who said we can win in Vietnam and those who said we can't win, so let's get out. There was no debate about all the other people, the millions of us who were marching and saying we shouldn't win, we shouldn't even be fighting, we should allow that country to develop in its own ways, make its own mistakes, and there's nothing you have that's so precious and so great that justifies your going in there and saturation bombing with B-52s and burning villages and killing men, women, and children at the rate that you're doing, and spraying that country with dioxide and Agent Orange and destroying its ecology and wreaking that kind of havoc and murder and slaughter. There's nothing you have, no refrigerators, no General Motor cars, no great free enterprise system that you have that's so magnificent that justifies your doing that to those people. American workers in the 1820s and 30s. The American workers wanted a decent wage. They couldn't get a decent wage. They tried to form combinations, or what we would today call labor unions. The combinations were ruled by the courts and the laws as illegal. Violation of, I forget, what were the pegs? They put them on due process and various other things. Well, they realized if they were going to get better wages, they needed more organization and clout. They had to be able to strike, withhold their labor. To do that, they really needed organization. To get that organization, they needed to change those laws. To change those laws, they needed to be able to vote. So there they were fighting for the right to vote. To fight for the right to vote, they had to agitate for the right to assemble. That too was considered illegal. To even assemble, to agitate, to get the vote. So there were these fights over the rules of the games, and many political fights are fights over how the rules of the games, how the rules are going to be set down, because that predetermines the outcome. The best known and probably greatest popularized leader was Julius Caesar. Although thanks to the way history is manufactured and retailed, very few of us know him in that role. Here are some of the things that Caesar did in his 6 or 7 consulships and after the civil war against Pompey when he served as imperator, which has been misleadingly translated as dictator and more accurately should be called commander-in-chief or supreme commander. Once in power, Caesar founded new settlements for 80,000 proletarians. He distributed some of the choice lands to 20,000 poor families who had 3 or more children. Caesar sent many unemployed proletarians to repair ancient cities in the colonies or slated them for employment on public works in Rome. He ordered every large landholder to have at least 1/3 of his workforce as free labor instead of slave labor. This would compel payment of wages, and it would diminish the landowners' obscenely high profits, and it would reduce unemployment and crime. As relief to poor tenants, Caesar canceled a whole year of rent obligations for low to moderate dwellings. We have some rent control board people here. I know they're feeling warm right now. He increased duties on luxury imports to encourage Italian domestic industry and also to make the rich pay something to the state for their lavish lifestyle. He capped tax rates in the provinces in order to rein in the rapacious tax collectors and give the people in the provinces some relief. He ejected from the Senate a number of those who were associated with provincial plunder and corruption. He allowed repayments of debts at lower pre-war prices. He ordered that the interest people had paid be applied to reducing the principal they owed. Oh, if we could only get some banks to go along with that. Huh? He canceled all debt interest that was due since the beginning of the Civil War. This last measure alone, Suetonius reckons, reduced the debt right there with one swipe of the pen, reduced the debt by 1/4, which was a substantial loss to rich creditors. The economist Ray Brown, when he went to Cuba before the revolution, it was in 1958, he was there about a year or so before, was impressed by how every major road he saw went from a sugar plantation to a refinery to the seaport. While there were whole communities without roads that couldn't get to doctors, they couldn't have schools, couldn't see a priest, the sugar companies had their roads. And when you send foreign aid to those countries, 9 out of 10 of those dollars goes to build the infrastructure, to subsidize the capital investment of the private corporations, or to pay for the police and the army of that country, not to defend it from foreign invasion, because Uruguay is not going to invade Bolivia, because Taiwan isn't going to be invaded by the Philippines. But they need those big armies to defend their rulers from their own people, because those people are in such a state of immiseration. So that's where our foreign aid goes. And as someone once said, foreign aid is when the poor people, that's us, of a rich country, give money to the rich people of a poor country. Ladies and gentlemen, I say it without flinching, communism in Eastern Europe, Russia, China, Mongolia, North Korea, and Cuba brought land reform and human services, a dramatic bettering of the living conditions of hundreds of millions of people on a scale never before or never since witnessed in human history. And that's something to appreciate. Communism transformed desperately poor countries into societies in which everyone had adequate food, shelter, medical care, and education. And some of us who come from poor families, who carry around the hidden injuries of class, are very impressed by these achievements and are not willing to dismiss them as economistic. To say that socialism doesn't work is to overlook the fact that it did work, and it worked for hundreds of millions of people. But what about the democratic rights that they lost? We hear U.S. leaders talking about restoring democracy to the communist countries. But these countries, with the exception of Czechoslovakia, were not democracies before communism. Russia was a czarist autocracy. Poland was a right-wing fascist dictatorship under Pilsudski with concentration camps of its own. Albania was an Italian fascist protectorate as early as 1927. Cuba was a U.S.-sponsored dictatorship under that butcher Batista. Lithuania, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria were outright fascist regimes, openly allied with Nazi Germany in World War II. So what democracy are we talking about restoring? The socialist countries did not take away any rights that didn't exist there in the first place. Those countries where capitalism operates most successfully are the latter ones I mentioned. Capitalism is much more successful in Nigeria and Indonesia than it is in Denmark and capitalist Sweden. You see that, don't you? Much more successful. Oh, some of you are skeptical. Some of you don't understand that because you're thinking of success in terms of the well-being of the populations. But capitalism has nothing to do with the well-being of the populations. It's much more successful in Indonesia because the rate of surplus accumulation is many times higher than it is in Denmark. In Denmark, you've got stupid, ridiculous, meddling, troublesome, undermining, wasteful things like minimum wage laws, like occupational safety, like environmental protections, like pension funds, like medical care. And every dollar I have to spend on stupid things like that is one less dollar that I can put in my pocket. And the one thing about the haves, that one thing in that conflict between the haves and the have-nots, you must remember that the haves are really misnamed. They are not the haves, they're the have-it-alls. They won't stop. They want to have it all. Still greater wealth for the very few, it means less and less for the rest of us. Now, what's been marvelous with the Occupy movement is that this has been part of the protest. This has actually been recognized. That they actually come out and they start talking about the 1% and the 99%. I think that's a beautiful division. It's much better than those stupid quintile studies used to get. The top 20% make 4 times more or 8 times more than the bottom. What does that mean? What the hell are you talking about? That's not wealth. You know who's in the top 20%? If you make over $75,000, $80,000, you're in the top 20%. You're rich. They say the wealthiest top 20%, the wealthiest quintile, the wealthiest 1/5 make this. No, you got to look at the very, very, very tiny. That one. It's really not even 1%. It's really a fraction of 1%. 1% is. You're talking about 3.5 million people. There isn't that many in the super rich. It's more like 1/10 of 1%. But let's say 1%. We'll give. I mean, because everybody in 1% is doing pretty well. To finally get, these people out there in a mass popular movement talking about the great class divide that some of us have been talking about for 40 years and been trying to get people to recognize, and finding that we're called extreme, we're called ideological. Our colleagues in academia would frown at us or smirk and snicker and say, oh, that's a Marxist view or this or that. To finally see people out in the street just coming right out and saying 1% and 99% and seeing it getting picked up by commentators, let me say that's a big ideological victory right there. A victory in words. The capitalist state must keep the capitalist class from devouring itself. And we see that was happening with Enron, WorldCom, Halliburton, Harkin. The activist element of the investor class literally expropriating not only taxpayers and workers, but other investors. Say, hey, why worry about producing cars and refrigerators? Then you got to worry about trying to sell them and this and that and make a profit. Let's just go where the money is. Just tap into streams of money. Let's go. Who has money? Investors, pension funds, 401ks, all this stuff. Let's go and steal money from them. And they have been caught plundering investor income, billions of dollars. Many of these investors, of course, are small investors too, life pensions and all that. And this is a real crime. I mean, this is really now being looked at. And some of these guys are going to have to do hours of community service. We must read against the grain when we read mainstream history. And we must swim against the mainstream. And we must try to keep connected to those who came before us. Certainly not the Ciceros and the Catos, as we're urged and trained to do, nor even the Gracchi or Caesar or the Populares leaders, but rather we must try to stay linked to the anonymous masses upon whose shoulders they stood, the common people, who struggled against all odds with all the courage and fear and all the inconsistencies of ordinary people, who put themselves on the line, whose names we will never know, whose blood and tears we will never see, whose words and cries of pain we will never hear, and yet to whom we are linked in a past that is never dead and never really past, and a future that never arrives but keeps beckoning us and keeps us going. So history never ends, the last page is never written, and the best pages are written not by princes and presidents and prime ministers and popes, and not even by professors, but by the people. For all their faults and shortcomings, the people are all we have. In fact, we are they. Thank you very much.
The poet said, "Vite decano." We'll fix him. Who was it?
What does that mean, Dad?
He's self-denying. He's
very strong.
Oh.
What else, Jack? What else can you show him? Oh, show him the watermelon.
Yeah.
Can you show him how you put the pieces in, Jack? Where does it go? Oh, where's the corn? There it is.
Where are you coming from? Where did you stay last night?
So cute. Lifting your legs up.
Isn't this nice? She's sort of like a cousin of the
A cousin or an auntie.
Yeah, cousin, yeah. Really nice. Is that mine?
No, this is mine. I'm making a movie. You have a message for the world?
You still got it.
Still got it.
Shut up.
What do you think defined Lazoni's sound?
Best regards to you.
In solidarity.
Probably too late. I'll put it after the name.
His songs were, I think, well, truly wonderful.
Let's all look at the camera again.
And
Look at his eyes. It's like he's tapping into his genetic Italian, his 25% Italian genetics.
Oh, yeah.
Or deep, some deep memory of like, what's this language?
Forgive me, baby. Bella, 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 che cose belle. Ay, Maria, what the hell are you doing? You stuck your nails right in my finger, baby. That's all right. That's okay.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, I felt bad because
Oh. Yeah.
It's
okay, well, it's for Jack.
Soon Jack will be singing these songs, right?
Yeah. Jack has to learn a little bit of.
You know what I tried to keep you from? Because you
Calabrese dialect.
I took all the.
That's all for you.
I took them all away.
It's all the chocolates.
Oh, you did? Oh.
Yeah.
Well, the others I put somewhere. I don't remember where I put them.
You put them in your mouth.
Yeah, I think that might have happened.
I've got more of that too.
Well, when you get rushed, you do that.
Tony Spumoni, he mangia macaroni.
Can you sing any of the Kentucky songs? See if your friend, your pal here. How do I wipe this out? Let's see.
Sort of like Jamaican reggae from the 70s.
Delete one, is that it? Yeah. Fuck, break everything. Go ahead.
Oh, wait. I have a feeling I shouldn't be loading up your message machine.
Alright, that's right. No. So I hit menu select again?
No, you hit 3.
How the fuck do you know this?
Messages.
3. Now, if there were 3 messages on there, would I have to hit 9 and then 6, then 3?
No, always 3 too.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
We'll get some stills though.
I am. Oh, that was good.
Jack and Uncle Grandpa on the houseboat. Take 1. Action. So what do you think of Uncle Grandpa? It's pretty good. Yeah, you smile.
A chocolate drink. That's a nice drink. Where are you going, baby?
We have chocolate. Did you sleep well last night? Because I remember you ate chocolate last night, and I was worried it was going to keep you up.
Oh, no, I was okay.
Well, let me give you some chocolate then. Next scene is going to be... The next scene is Uncle Grandpa eats chocolate. You want this picture?
Yeah.
They are upside this plate, the right plate is upside down.
Yeah. That's cool. Good to see you, Dad. You still got some muscles. This guy's got muscles. You know, man, when you got all those muscles, what's up with that? This guy's got muscles, Jackie. Your grandpa's 90, but he's got a lot of muscles.
Yeah. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. How are you doing?
Yeah, look at her. She's looking good.
Thanks. You want a little water or something, Dad?
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2,
I'm taking a little video.
Oh yeah, and I have another one. Yeah, the little boy. It's that's not really true. And, you know, a lot of the things. That's nice.
Who is that, Jack?
German. His name is James Parenti. I live for him. I love him.
Aww. John Michael David Parenti.
Oh, don't burn this sucker. Take my glasses off. Okay. Don't be a ball breaker. Just take my glasses. Good. Don't be a ball breaker.
Capitalism gets him upset. He doesn't like exploitation. He's against exploitation, right? Yeah. You don't want you think it's bad when you're exploited. Yeah.
A grown-up explosive. But they decided someone just curious to see. So I went down, spent a whole day in the men's department. We met around have discussion about politics. I said, how would you run?
operate together and we think together we can accomplish more, but I don't want to sit there like, you know,
Flyby for Grandpa. 09 Jack Hunter. Air Canada Flight 1225. So flyby for Grandpa. Control tower over. Okay, yeah, cleared for flyby. Yeah, good job.
You get hit, but people get hurt by how they get hurt like that. That's not good. Don't do that. That's not for doing good. He said that as he lifts the guy's ass with a right hand. That's about.